Talking about a piece Linda Greenhouse wrote in the New York Times a couple of days ago about the Supreme Court ruling 5-4, the absolutely right call when the Supreme Court refused to block California from limiting church attendance in an effort to control the spread of this pandemic. So Linda says, it was indisputably, or she writes, it was indisputably the right call. So why did the court's order, 5-4, that California was in the right, issued at midnight on a Friday night, fill her with dread rather than relief? Well, the answer, and you're probably way ahead of me, is obvious. It should have been a unanimous vote. It should have been 9-0 in favor of California, but the vote was 5-4. And it was because what also upset her was because of who the four dissenters are. The four most conservative justices, two of them appointed by the president, who a couple of months ago was demanding that churches be allowed to open by Easter. And even before the brutal murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Trump was openly encouraging protests in the capitals of states not reopening as quickly as he wanted them to make the economic picture in Trump's screwed up country look better. And as a completely freaked out country witnessed last Monday, a week ago today, as this orange ape held a Bible in front of a church after demonstrators were violently cleared out of his path, we saw Trump using religion again, this is not new, as a wedge to deflect attention from the consequences of his own inability to do anything that most humans learn by the time they're 15. Certainly not lead this country. So the recognition, Linda writes, that 4 Supreme Court justices, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh, would have invoked the court's power. They would have, if they had been in the majority, they would have invoked the court's power to undermine fact-based public policy. The idea of isolating people as best we could to conquer this pandemic, they would have undermined that policy in the name of a bullshit claim of religious discrimination. The whole thing was beyond depressing. It was terrifying. This is what the Supreme Court, with one more Trump appointee, God help us if there's 2. This is where it's going. A totally subservient Justice Department, a totally subservient Supreme Court, a totally subservient Republican Party. What the fuck do we need? What kind of a slam against the head do we need to let us know that it doesn't make any difference anymore if you're conservative or liberal or somewhere in between? Unless you're a fascist. Unless you are a fascist. You want this man removed from power as quickly as humanly possible. Does that sound like an overstatement on my part? Or Linda Greenhouse's part? I mean, it's her article. She answers the question, okay, take a look at Kavanaugh's dissenting opinion. He wrote this, quote, California's latest safety guidelines discriminate against places of worship and in favor of comparable secular businesses. Such discrimination violates the First Amendment, end quote. Linda points out it's interesting that while Justices Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas signed Justice Kavanaugh's opinion, Justice Alito did not. And perhaps, she writes, he's just too good a lawyer to subscribe to the flimsy analysis underlying this opinion. Fair enough, but Alito evidently couldn't be bothered to explain his own dissenting vote. And no less than his fellow dissenters, Alito obviously inhaled the unfounded claim of religious discrimination that this filthy president has injected into an atmosphere already saturated with polarized rhetoric and lies and deception and bullshit. And then Linda makes the legal observation. And I'm glad she did. This is something I'm not capable of doing. But here's what she wrote. Here's what's wrong with the Kavanaugh opinion. He throws words around imprecisely in a context where precision is everything. The state's rules, he says, discriminate. Okay, we're all against discrimination, but what does this potent word mean? To discriminate, in the way law uses the word, means to treat differently things that are alike without a good reason for doing so. That's why racial discrimination, for example, is almost always unconstitutional. People are people, regardless of their race. And a government would need a powerful reason for using race to treat people differently. I can't think of a valid one. Can you, Truth Seeker? I can't. But the concept of discrimination, if it's properly understood, doesn't fit in this case. California is not subjecting things that are alike to treatment that's different. Churches are not like the retail stores of, say, cannabis dispensaries, which was included in Kavanaugh's list of comparable secular businesses. He actually put that in there. Sitting in communal worship for an hour or more is not like picking up a prescription or a pizza or an ounce of marijuana. You don't need a degree in either law or public health to figure that out. If anything, California is giving churches preferential treatment, since other places where people gather in large numbers, like lecture halls and theaters, are still off limits. So what was the problem that these four justices had? What was their problem? Well, Brett Kavanaugh's written opinion offers a clue. And here it is. The Christian observance of Pentecost was a week ago, last Sunday. And the clock was ticking as the Supreme Court considered the South Bay United Pentecostal Church's request. Note the name, South Bay United Pentecostal Church. Kavanaugh wrote, quote, "The church would suffer irreparable harm from not being able to hold services on Pentecost Sunday in a way that comparable secular businesses and persons can conduct their activities." End quote. What does that sentence even mean? What's the secular comparator when it comes to observing Pentecost? A Sunday afternoon football game? Using his example, going to a dispensary and getting an ounce of a reefer? Back to Linda. She writes, I'm baffled by why a particular liturgical observance should have even a walk-on role in this opinion. Last weekend was also Shavuot. Shavuot, is that how you say it? A major Jewish holiday. But it's the Christian calendar about which recently appointed federal judges seem exclusively concerned. No kidding. In April, Judge Justin Walker of the Federal District Court in Louisville blocked that city from enforcing a ban on drive-in church services. His opinion began this way, this judge, quote, on Holy Thursday, an American mayor criminalized the communal celebration of Easter. Now, the guy who said that, Judge Justin Walker, this is the Chinese agent and leader of the Senate, Senator Mitch the Turtle McConnell's young protege, who is on the verge of confirmation to the powerful federal appeals court in Washington, D.C. That guy said, quote, on Holy Thursday, an American mayor criminalized the communal celebration of Easter, end quote. It's a fucking lie. It's an unbelievable falsehood. But that's where we live now. That's what passes for enlightened judicial interpretation of the law. And Linda points out the obvious. No one was stopping the church from observing Pentecost. She writes, as its own brief points out, the church conducts as many as 5 services on a typical Sunday. 5 services, each attracting 200 to 300 worshipers. As the state of California pointed out, it could just schedule more services. Jesus Christ, what is wrong with just break it into smaller groups? Because California, the state, had argued the churches had to limit the number of people crowding into these edifices of ridiculousness, had to be either 25% of the building's capacity or 100 people, whichever was smaller, lesser. Nobody tried to tell these Pentecostal nut fucks that they couldn't go to church if they wanted to. And what's wrong with holding an outside service? You see what this is about. It's not about freedom of religion. It's not about the First Amendment. It's not about any of that. It's establishing a fascistic / religious dictatorship in this country. Hey, Truth Seekers, Mike Malloy here. While you're sheltering in place and practicing safe social behavior, probably catching up on the Malloy cast, remember, we have a new weekly program just for our patron supporters. There are other thank you gifts for your support. Remember, visit MikeMalloy.com and click on the big patron link on the main page. You can't miss it, and we can't do without you.